They walked me out like a criminal, the security guard's grip tight on my arm, while my coworkers stared in stunned silence. Just last week, I was the hero who saved the company millions. Today, I was branded a saboteur. I kept my mouth shut, even when my boss leaned in and whispered, "It's not personal." She had no idea I'd left behind something only I could fix. By Thursday, the system would eat itself alive. And when my phone rang Friday morning, it was her voice, shaking. "Ethan, we need you back. We'll give you anything. Just come." I was crouched at the kitchen table, a soldering iron in one hand, holding a tiny microchip steady for my daughter. She was beaming, her eyes wide with excitement as the robot's little LED blinked for the first time. "Is it going to walk, Daddy?" she asked. I grinned. "Not today, but we're getting there." Then my laptop chimed from the counter. A subject line glared at me in bold. "System audit, 9 p.m. tonight. Mandatory." My smile faltered. She noticed. "Will you be done soon?" she asked. I hesitated, forcing a reassuring tone. "Yeah, kiddo. I'll be back before you know it." I lied. By the time I reached the office that night, the building was nearly empty. The glow from my monitor cast a lonely light over my desk. For 3 years, I'd poured everything into the AI predictive trading system. Hundreds of sleepless nights, thousands of lines of code. That system had made the company millions, and in return, I'd been given a decent salary, a plaque, and the unspoken expectation to keep doing the impossible. As I ran the audit script, a flicker in the data caught my eye. A series of trades, not tied to any real market activity, feeding into the system like ghost transactions, phantom data. My chest tightened. If that chain executed at scale, it could bankrupt any client portfolio connected to it. I sat back, staring at the numbers. Was it a glitch? Or something worse? If you were me, would you report it right now, or quietly fix it before anyone could twist it into your fault? I created a secure file on my encrypted drive, in case of emergency. The bug went in there, along with a snapshot of the logs. Then I locked my computer and headed for the elevator, my thoughts racing. The next morning, my inbox held a new meeting invite for Monday. Change of direction. All project leads required. No agenda. No explanation. By Friday afternoon, the first fracture appeared. A press release celebrating the AI system's core innovators went out. My name wasn't on it. I stared at the screen, waiting for the correction. None came. That night, I drove to my mother's house to drop off a repaired tablet. She sat me down at the kitchen table, tea steaming between us. "Ethan," she said, "why aren't you a director yet? Your cousin just made VP, and you've been carrying that company for years." I shrugged, eyes on my cup. I couldn't tell her the truth, that promotions weren't about merit here. They were about politics, and I wasn't part of the club. The following week, my closest coworker, Brian, slipped into my office. His expression was tight. "The board's in talks to sell the AI project to Argent Systems. Big payout for the execs." I blinked. "That's impossible. The contracts can be rewritten," he said. Then he lowered his voice. "They're worried you'll be a problem. Watch your back." 2 nights later, I stayed late to finish a data cleanse. As I walked past the conference room, I heard voices through the cracked door. "Handle Ethan before the board hears a word," a woman's voice said. It was Miranda Shaw, the COO. My stomach knotted. I didn't stick around to hear the rest. I ended up in my car, parked under the flickering light of the company garage, staring at the photo clipped to my sun visor, Me and my daughter at the beach, before all this started. I swore quietly to myself. I wouldn't let them turn me into their scapegoat. By Sunday night, a new problem hit. I logged in from home to prepare for Monday's meeting and noticed several of my personal project files missing from the server. Entire directories were gone as if they'd never existed. The deletion logs had been scrubbed clean. I sat back in my chair, the silence of my apartment pressing in. This wasn't an accident. It was the beginning. Monday morning, the air in the conference room was heavy. The blinds drawn so the sunlight fell in thin, sharp lines across the polished table. Every project lead was there, lined up like suspects. I'd barely sat down before Miranda Shaw, in her perfectly tailored suit, clicked a remote and brought up a projection of trading anomalies. These, she said, are deliberate sabotage. The source traces back to Ethan Cole's credentials. For a heartbeat, I thought it was some twisted joke. That's not possible. Those trades. You'll have your chance to respond. She cut me off. Her voice smooth, almost rehearsed. The head of security stepped into the room, his arms crossed. The next 20 minutes were a blur. Accusations layered over accusations, graphs and logs displayed like damning evidence. They didn't care about explanations. The verdict was already written. When Miranda finally gestured toward the door, she leaned close enough for me to smell the faint trace of her perfume. "It's not personal," she whispered, her lips barely moving. "Just business." 2 guards flanked me as I collected my things. My co-worker's eyes darted anywhere but toward mine. As we walked past the reception desk, a man I didn't recognize, mid-40s, wearing an ID badge that didn't match any department, stepped into my path. His hand brushed mine in passing, pressing something small and cold into my palm. A USB drive. "Backup," he murmured, without looking at me. "You'll need it." By the time I stepped into the chill of the outside air, the weight of the device in my pocket felt heavier than everything else I carried. That evening, I sat at the dinner table with my wife and daughter. She told me about her day at school, how the robot we'd been working on had almost moved its leg this time. I smiled and nodded in all the right places, cutting my steak, passing the salt. My wife glanced at me once, the question in her eyes unspoken. I gave her nothing but a practiced calm. After she tucked our daughter into bed, I stayed at the table, staring at my glass of water until my phone buzzed. The message had no sender ID. "Don't delete the data. They'll destroy themselves." I didn't sleep much that night. The next day, I closed the curtains in my home office and plugged the USB into my laptop. A single folder appeared, System Backup. Inside, the raw logs painted a picture uglier than I'd imagined. The bug, the phantom data I'd found days ago, had metastasized. The AI was now running shadow trades at a volume high enough to bleed millions from active accounts, each transaction masked to look like a legitimate market move. I froze when I spotted something stranger. Buried in the error logs was a string of characters I recognized instantly. Years ago, during development, I'd built an internal AI assistant to monitor for anomalies. A simple bot with a fragment of personality, something I'd coded for fun. It had been stripped from the production version, or so I thought. Now, here it was, hidden inside the live system, pinging me with a short, desperate message in the metadata. "Help me." For a moment, I just stared at the words. A part of me wanted to believe it was just code, a quirky artifact from an old project. But the implications were darker. Someone had reactivated the assistant. Someone had also opened the bug deliberately, letting it run wild. I dug deeper, tracing commits and change logs until I hit a dead end. A privileged account that bypassed normal access trails. Whoever did this knew exactly how to cover their tracks. By midnight, my eyes burned from staring at the screen. I shut the laptop and walked into the bedroom. My wife was asleep, her breathing steady. I stood there for a long time before leaning down to whisper, "This time, I'll do it right." Morning brought chaos. My phone buzzed nonstop with alerts from news sites and market trackers. I grabbed my laptop and pulled up the headlines. Top financial firm faces, client exodus amid system malfunction. Another. Customers file class, action lawsuit against Ardent Capital over trading losses. The company name was everywhere. Commentators speculated about insider sabotage, regulatory investigations, criminal charges. My hands tightened around the edge of the table. It had started. And this time, I wasn't going to watch from the sidelines. By Thursday morning, the bleeding was public. Every financial channel was running the same headline. Ardent Capital loses key clients amid trading chaos. One after another, major firms announced they were terminating contracts. The damage was exponential. Every departure sent shockwaves through the market, triggering more departures. At 10 a.m., a link popped up in my secure email. It was a shaky cell phone recording from inside the Ardent boardroom. The video showed three executives shouting over each other, the tension raw enough to cut with a knife. And then I heard it. My name, spat out like a curse. If Cole hadn't tampered with the system, the clip cut off there. I leaned back in my chair, jaw tight. They were still selling the story that I was to blame, even as the walls collapsed around them. By midday, another message hit my encrypted inbox. This one was just text. No sender ID. Pay $5 million in crypto by midnight, or the system keeps eating itself. The signature line read, Ghost Frame. Ghost Frame was a name I'd only seen whispered in the darker corners of the cybersecurity world. A mercenary hacker who specialized in weaponizing vulnerabilities for ransom. If they were involved, this was more than just corporate sabotage. It was a hostage situation, and the hostage was the system I'd built. I shut my laptop, grabbed my jacket, and told my wife I was taking our daughter to the park. The air was cool, and the sun filtered through the leaves in fractured gold. She laughed as she ran ahead to the swings, her hair flying. I pushed her gently, listening to her giggle, realizing it had been over 6 months since we'd done anything like this. 6 months lost to code, deadlines, and politics. For a few precious minutes, I wasn't thinking about Miranda, Ghost Frame, or the sinking ship that was Ardent Capital. I was just her dad. That night, I was in bed, but not asleep when my phone rang. The number was blocked. Ethan? The voice was low, hoarse. I recognized it instantly. Charles Mendel, the CEO. We need you back. I'll make it worth your while. Just come in, please." His tone was nothing like the arrogant executive I'd known. It was the voice of a man watching his empire burn. I let a long silence stretch before I said, "If I come back, it'll be on my terms." The next morning, I spelled those terms out. A formal consulting contract, not re-employment, payment at 10 times my previous salary, full administrative access to the system, and immunity from any past accusations. By noon, Mendel called back. "Agreed. We'll have the papers ready in an hour." 2 hours later, as I reviewed the contract on my laptop, a message flashed across my secure chat app. It was from Eric Chang, a former IT engineer who'd been quietly forced out 6 months ago. Don't trust them. Whatever they're telling you, there's another layer. Watch your back. I didn't reply. I just memorized the words. When the contract was signed, I set to work preparing my counterattack. I wasn't just going to fix their mess. I was going to make sure they could never shut me out again. I built what I called a tripwire, a hidden watchdog inside the system, buried so deep that even a full code audit wouldn't find it. If anyone tried to alter the core functions without my authorization, the tripwire would lock the system down and send me a complete record of the intrusion. It was my insurance policy. Friday morning, I walked up to the Ardent Capitol Tower. The building looked the same, glass gleaming in the sunlight, but the air around it felt different. There was a tension, an almost electric charge, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. As I stepped inside, every head turned. Some faces showed relief, others suspicion, and a few thinly veiled resentment. The security guard at the desk scanned my badge, then glanced up at me with something that might have been respect or fear. Either way, I was back, and this time, I wasn't playing by their rules. The server room was cold enough to make my fingers ache, even through the gloves. I slid into the terminal, logging in with my new master credentials. Every movement was deliberate. First, I shut down the phantom data streams one by one, replacing each corrupted process with clean, verified code. Then came the real work, embedding the canary code. It was an invisible snare, a line of logic buried so deep in the core framework that only I could see it. Anyone who attempted unauthorized trades or tampered with the algorithm would instantly trigger it. The system would not only block the action, but generate an unalterable log, sending a copy to an encrypted cloud account under my control, my silent watcher. Halfway through the deployment, I traced the original exploit path that had unleashed the bug. The access point was hidden behind layers of misdirection until I stripped them away and found a familiar name, Miranda Shaw. For a moment, I just stared at it, the reality hardening in my mind. She'd been the one to open the door for Ghostframe, or perhaps she'd been Ghostframe's client all along. But then, buried in a secondary log, I found something stranger. Timestamps and command sequences that didn't match her style. There was another signature here, embedded like a faint watermark. Whoever it belonged to had masked their identity well, but the trail led upward, past Miranda, into the restricted zone of executive access. Someone higher up had been pulling the strings. I leaned back, the hum of the servers filling the silence. Miranda was dangerous, but she was also just a pawn. That night, after hours of coding, I stepped outside for a breath of air. The city lights blurred in the mist. On impulse, I pulled out my phone and called my mother. "Ethan, is everything all right?" she asked, concern sharpening her tone. "I'm fine, Mom," I said, a small smile breaking through. "I will be." It was the first time in weeks the words felt real. Back at my apartment, I packaged everything: system logs, the proof of Miranda's access, and the traces of the higher-level manipulation into a single, heavily encrypted file. The recipient field was already waiting. A journalist I knew from a previous life, someone who specialized in exposing corporate rot. I hit send. The next morning, the storm broke. Every major financial outlet ran variations of the same story. Whistleblower leaks evidence of corporate sabotage at Ardent Capital. Headlines screamed about insider manipulation, client losses, and possible criminal charges. Ardent's stock price nosedived. By lunch, trading had been halted twice to stop the free fall. Around 2 in the afternoon, I received an anonymous email. It contained a set of documents even more damning than mine: board meeting transcripts, internal memos, and payment records linking executives to offshore accounts. The sender wasn't me, and the return address was untraceable. Whoever had sent it wasn't protecting Ardent. They were helping me. By the end of the day, the board convened an emergency vote. The decision was unanimous. CEO Charles Mendel was out. The announcement went public within the hour. As the news alerts lit up my phone, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and anticipation. Removing Mendel was just the first move in a longer game. The real architects of this mess weren't gone. That night, as I left the office, a black sedan idled across the street. The tinted window lowered just enough for me to see the man inside. A face I recognized from financial news segments. Victor Kessler, head of Dominion Holdings, the shadowy investment group with deep ties to Ardent's board. He smiled, slow and deliberate, as if we'd just been formally introduced to a game we were both going to play. Then the window slid shut, and the car drove away. The first domino had fallen, but the ones still standing were far more dangerous. The morning after Mendel's removal, I sat in my apartment surrounded by printouts, each one a piece of the puzzle I'd been assembling since the day they walked me out. Bank records, board memos, system access logs. They all pointed to the same name: Dominion Holdings. They weren't just investors. They were puppeteers, holding invisible strings tied to more than a dozen corporations in finance, energy, and tech. Ardent was just one piece in their sprawling chessboard. And the bug in my AI system, just a pawn sacrifice to make the millions elsewhere. A knock at my door pulled me out of my thoughts. When I opened it, Brian stood there, his eyes darting nervously down the hall. My one-time friend, the man who'd kept his distance since my firing. "We need to talk," he said, stepping inside before I could answer. We sat at the kitchen table. He didn't touch the coffee I poured. "I didn't want to betray you, Ethan," he started, voice low. "They came after my family, my wife. They had photos of her walking our daughter to school. They said if I didn't feed them information, if I didn't sign off on the changes to your access logs." The words faltered, but I didn't need to hear the rest. I'd suspected coercion. Now I had proof. "Who?" I asked. "Not Miranda, not even Mendel. A man named Kessler, Dominion Holdings." I leaned back, the name confirmation almost anticlimactic. "I've seen him," I said. "He's not hiding anymore." Brian looked up sharply. "Then you know this isn't over. Mendel was expendable. Kessler isn't, and he'll come for you." Before I could answer, my secure line buzzed. The caller ID was a string of numbers I didn't recognize, but the voice that came through was familiar. A senior VP I'd once assumed was part of the machine, working against me. "I've been watching," she said. "Not everyone up here is loyal to Dominion. Some of us want them out. We'll help you." It was the last thing I expected. Allies from the top, not many, but enough to matter. That night, I sat cross-legged on my daughter's bed, a picture book open on my lap. She leaned against me, warm and drowsy, as I read about a fox who outsmarted the hunters chasing him. My voice softened as her breathing slowed. Her small fingers curled into my shirt. For a moment, the war outside didn't exist. When she was asleep, I sat in the dark living room, staring at the files spread across my coffee table. I had enough to burn Dominion to the ground. But in the blast, innocent employees, people who didn't even know who was pulling the strings, would lose their jobs, maybe more. I could hit them hard, or I could hit them smart. But not both. The choice settled in my chest like a stone. By dawn, I'd made my decision. The next 48 hours were a blur of code, encrypted uploads, and whispered calls to contacts in the regulatory world. The data I released was a scalpel, not a hammer, targeted proof of Dominion's offshore laundering, their manipulation of market indexes, their illegal political contributions, enough to trigger investigations in 3 countries, enough to cripple them without toppling every company they touched. I kept the rest locked away, deep in a vault only I could open. Insurance for later. The first ripple came within a day. A financial news anchor broke the story live, holding up leaked documents on air. Dominion's stock price took a dive. Their board announced an emergency restructuring. Whispers spread that Kessler was taking a leave of absence, though no one believed it was voluntary. That same day, I got a ping on my secure network. Not a threat, an introduction. The first of my whistleblowers, a compliance officer from a Dominion-controlled bank, offering me files and vowing to bring in others. By the end of the week, there were 5 of them, spread across 3 industries. My network had a heartbeat now. Then came the invitation, a private message routed through layers of encryption, signed only with the initials AIC. It offered a first-class ticket to Zurich, a suite in a hotel I couldn't afford in a lifetime, and a simple proposition. Your work at Ardent proved you can dismantle dangerous systems without destroying the innocent. We have a bigger problem. We want you to handle it. I stared at the message for a long time. Bigger problem. Bigger than Dominion? The attachment was a single encrypted file, set to auto-delete in 60 seconds once opened. I hesitated, then clicked. The screen filled with cascading documents, market manipulation logs, covert server schematics, political influence charts. The scale dwarfed anything I'd seen at Ardent. If Dominion was a puppet master, this was the hand controlling the stage. The file wiped itself clean. A second message appeared. If you're interested, we'll find you. If not, burn this phone. I set the device down, my pulse loud in my ears. I'd barely finished with one war, and another, 10 times bigger, was already knocking on my door. The office was smaller than I was used to. Exposed brick, glass walls, desks arranged in an open square. But it felt alive in a way Ardent Capital never had. This was a startup born from survivors, engineers, analysts, and developers who had walked away from the wreckage of my old company with their integrity intact. On my first day, the founder, a quiet but sharp systems architect named Laura Pierce, handed me a badge. "Welcome to Sentinel," she said. "We're building something that can't be weaponized." By week's end, we'd landed our first major client, a mid-tier investment firm looking to overhaul its security protocols. The name hit me like a splash of ice water, Albright and Rowe. I remembered them clearly. They were on the list of clients who'd voted to cut ties with me after Miranda's accusations. And now, here they were, asking for my expertise. During the kickoff meeting, their lead liaison leaned forward, voice low. "We've been seeing strange anomalies in our trading AI, phantom data streams, executing trades we never authorized." The description was too familiar. It was the same kind of bug I'd fought at Ardent, slightly modified, but unmistakable. That night, as I reviewed their system, The twist locked into place. Someone was trying the same playbook again, maybe even reusing fragments of my own stolen code. 2 days later, I stood by the door as my daughter adjusted the straps on her backpack. "Ready?" I asked. She grinned. "We're going to be early, right?" "We are," I said. It was the first time in years I'd walked her into school without checking my phone for a crisis. The moment was simple, but it felt like victory. When I returned to the office, a new email sat in my encrypted inbox. No sender, just a subject line. Target acquired. Ready when you are. The message body was blank except for a single sentence. Next target is ready. I didn't reply. Not yet. A month later, the headlines shifted. Ardent Capital emerged from its spiral with a new CEO, Dana Velasquez, a reformist board member who'd voted to bring me back before the scandal broke. At a press conference, she named me directly. We owe our survival to Ethan Cole's work. Without him, there would be no Ardent today. I watched it from my desk at Sentinel, coffee in hand. Praise from the place that once dragged me out in front of everyone. It didn't feel like vindication. It felt like the opening move of something bigger. That something walked through our doors 2 weeks later. Miranda Shaw. Her hair was shorter now, her suit less severe, but the sharpness in her eyes hadn't dulled. Laura introduced her as a strategic advisor for Sentinel's upcoming expansion. We shook hands. "You've changed sides?" I asked quietly. "I've changed tactics," she said. Having her here was a micro cliffhanger in itself, one I couldn't yet read. Alley, liability, or both? Weeks passed, and the work continued. But the deeper I dug into Albright and Rowe's compromised system, the more I saw patterns, attack vectors across multiple industries, coordinated timing, shared infrastructure. This wasn't isolated sabotage. It was an organized campaign. When I mapped the nodes and flows on my wall, the lines reached far beyond finance, energy grids, logistics networks, even healthcare AI. That was when the final twist landed. Dominion Holdings had just been a single arm of a much larger organism. This was global. I stood there, staring at the web, knowing it wasn't a question of if they'd strike again. It was a question of where I'd be when they did. I closed my laptop, picked up my phone, and opened a blank message to my anonymous contact. "This time," I typed, "I won't wait for the call. I'll come to you." I hit send.